now listening to a Purple Crayon Productions broadcast.
Hi everybody, and welcome to Solved. Solved is a show where we talk about cryptids, conspiracy theories, and all things uncanny and spooky that have actually turned out to be true. My name is Emma Creekmore, and today we're going to be talking about gorillas. And you may be thinking, gorillas? That's not a conspiracy theory, they're not a cryptid, everyone believes in gorillas, they're a real thing. However, at one point in Western civilization, they didn't believe they were real. Up until actually around 1847, when bones were discovered and sent back, no one believed in gorillas. And that might sound ridiculous now, but back then, once we go into it, you'll hear of all the wacky and crazy things people had said and what kind of caused them to be cryptids. So the first mention of gorillas is back in the 5th century. 5th, not 15th, by a Greek explorer named Hanno. He called them gorillae, with an E instead of an A. However, many modern scientists believe that what he was actually observing was likely a chimpanzee or baboon and not an actual gorilla. Many of these observations that modern scientists are based just on what the size and physique and behavioral patterns of what he was describing. However, this is the first written documentation we have of something called a gorilla. However, this is not when gorillas by any means were discovered. Gorillas have always existed, and obviously people have existed near and around gorilla since the beginning of time, essentially, or beginning of human consciousness and thought. It's just our first record of something being called a gorilla. So that was in the 5th century, and the next major description was got by this British explorer named Andrew Battelle in the 1590s. So Battelle kind of has a wacky journey. He was kind of a wacky guy. So he was on a journey to the Rio de la Plata, and it's a bay found on the borders of modern-day Argentina and Uruguay. So while he was here, he and some other members of his crew were captured by natives of I believe at the time it was Uruguay, and they were turned over to the Portuguese, who sent them to Angola, which is, if you don't know, a nation in the south of Africa, as prisoners. He spent around 18 years here in Angola and the surrounding countries. Most of his time was spent there as a prisoner, Portuguese most of the time, but sometimes he was also the prisoner of some local tribes. But he also spent a lot of time doing like odd exploration jobs for the Portuguese, just like little things that they didn't really want to send like one of their good guys to go do. So they were like, okay, this Battelle guy who we have, who is an explorer, but like, we don't really trust him to do one of the important jobs. So we'll give him but we have this little job that we need someone to do, so he can do it. And that's kind of what he was doing for a lot of the years, Battelle. And so during a lot of these trips, he described like furry man-beasts and human-like monsters who regularly invaded his campsite. They would invade his campsite in particular during the daytime after all of the humans had left for the day. And he always would remark about how they managed to know enough to like eat all their food, but not enough to know to put more wood onto the fire, which was pretty funny. So now, why were they like cryptids though? So like, imagine you're living in England or any other Western nation, and you hear about furry man-beasts and human-like monsters invading this guy's camp who's been a prisoner for 18 years. It just doesn't sound that plausible. Even hearing about furry man-beasts or human-like monsters kind of sounds pretty similar to our descriptions of Bigfoot. So it makes sense to how ridiculous that would be, and like the claims of that would be. People just didn't believe it because they were like that's kind of stupid. That's ridiculous. Like, a lot of self-respecting scientists just didn't really think that was a real thing. They sort of just said, nah, that's just kind of stupid. He was spending 18 years as a prisoner, this Patel guy, probably going crazy, probably like kind of crazy tinfoil hat guy. It doesn't really sound very plausible. And this was the 1590s. So people didn't really went on for hundreds of years thinking this. And there have been other mentions, but they all were sort of treated similarly to Battelle. They were all sort of treated as if they were crazy tinfoil hat people. No one really believed any of it. No, there was no proof by anything besides these journals that these explorers had. So no one, it's when you think about it from their perspective, it's reasonable to understand why no one believed in gorillas. So gorillas themselves remained obscure, poorly understood until 1847. So when this guy, Thomas Savage, who was a physician, he was a naturalist, and he was also a Protestant clergyman, he was sent to Liberia on a missionary trip. And while there, he obtained several gorilla bones, including skulls, and he was able to identify them as gorillas, and also was able to co-author with a Harvard anatomist, Jeffrey Wyman, the first formal academic description of the newly discovered species. So just to put some of that in perspective, just about timing. So America had gained independence around 75 years before Western civilization believed in gorillas. Sounds kind of crazy to me, but you can think what you want. America, and in general Western civilization, also, even from this, although it was published, some people still didn't believe it because there was still no physical proof of it. There wasn't beast. It was still just bones, and people were like, that could be anything. A lot more people started to believe in gorillas after this, and it was sort of a bit more widely regarded as an actual animal. But it wasn't until a decade after the bones were discovered or obtained that explorer Paul de Chaillu would hunt live gorillas, sending back specimens to Europe he sent them back to Europe mostly to fund his expeditions, but in sending back these gorillas, it pretty much kicked to the curb any suspicion of what these monsters could be or be doing. It pretty much kicked to the curb any sort of suspicion or any belief that these weren't real animals. So, but another thing that happened is, so people believed in gorillas. People, at least on some level, they'd been proven real. But what happened is there were other subspecies of gorillas, like the mountain gorilla, that remained a myth until around 1902, when German Captain Robert von Beringe reported them and was able to conclusively give evidence to Western civilization that they were real. Which is kind of wild to me, I guess. It's just thinking about gorillas and cryptids in general. People didn't believe in gorillas. From the first reports of gorillas, even after the 5th century, even if you don't count the 5th century ones in the 1500s, more of our time on Earth has been spent not believing in gorillas than it has in which a society has that believes in gorillas. Which I think is pretty wild. But gorillas in general, they exist now. Cryptids exist. So gorillas were once cryptids, so if you are a Bigfoot fanatic, Nessie fanatic, Jersey Devil fanatic, Mothman, any of them, and people aren't believing you, you could just point to gorillas and say, people didn't believe in gorillas for 350 years. And boom, what other argument do they have? Who knows? Who knows what could be lurking out there? All right, so that's solved. Thank you for listening.
Cryptid Girl Summer!